The massive crystal ship moved through space like a living mountain. Its surface gleamed with colors that had no names in any language except Cathara. Inside the ship, Warcast Zekthul stood 12 feet tall, his body made of living crystal that caught and bent light in impossible ways. His armor grew from his skin like natural plates, and when he moved, gravity itself seemed to bend around him. He was perfect. All Cathara were perfect. They had been the rulers of the galaxy for 10,000 years, and every other species knew their place beneath them. The bridge of the ship hummed with quiet power. Other Cathara worked at stations that floated in the air, controlled by thought alone. Their technology was so advanced that most species could not even understand how it worked. To the Cathara, this was natural. They were alpha, everything else was lesser. Warcast, one of his officers said, the words vibrating through crystal rather than air. We have found something interesting. Zekthul turned his massive head toward the display that appeared in the air before him. It showed a small yellow star with several planets orbiting around it. Nothing special. The galaxy was full of such systems, but his officer pointed to the third planet from the star. There is life here, Warcast, a young species. They have just begun to leave their world. Zekthul studied the readings. The planet was mostly blue and green, covered in water and plants. The life forms were small, soft-looking creatures that stood on two legs. Their technology was primitive. Their ships were crude metal things that burned chemical fuel to move. They had not even learned to bend gravity or shape matter with thought. Classification, Zekthul asked. Delta, Warcast. Perhaps Epsilon. They are very weak. Delta was the lowest useful classification. Epsilon meant the species was only good for food or simple labor. Zekthul had seen thousands of such species in his long life. They all followed the same pattern. First, they would try to fight. Then they would beg. Finally, they would serve. The Cathara had built their empire on this simple truth. In all the galaxy, only they deserved to be called Alpha. A few species had earned beta status by proving useful as servants and administrators. Most were Gamma or Delta. The worst were Epsilon, kept alive only because they had some small value. This was the natural order. The strong ruled the weak. The perfect commanded the imperfect. The Cathara had proven this truth across 40,000 star systems. Send a scout force, Zekthul commanded. Learn about these creatures. Map their defenses. Count their population centers. Yes, Warcast. 3 smaller ships detached from the Crystal Mountain and moved toward the blue planet. Zekthul watched them go with the calm confidence of someone who had done this many times before. In a few cycles, he would have a complete report. The local species would be cataloged, their usefulness measured, their fate decided. He thought about the reports he had read of other new species discovered in recent years. The Vorthak had been strong warriors, but they fought with honor and codes that made them predictable. The Cathara had turned their strength against them and won in less than a year. The Milani had been clever with technology, but they were too peaceful to fight effectively. They had surrendered after a single demonstration of Cathara power. These new creatures, the scouts were calling them humans, based on their own word for themselves, looked even weaker than most. Their bodies appeared soft and fragile. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no obvious defenses. Their technology was thousands of years behind Cathara science. Zekthul felt a moment of disappointment. Sometimes he hoped to find a species that would provide a real challenge. The early years of the Cathara expansion had been exciting, when they met species that could at least fight back for a while. But as their empire grew, they encountered fewer and fewer races that could even slow them down. Perhaps these humans would be different. Perhaps they had hidden strengths that the initial scans had missed. But as the reports came back from the scout ships, Zekthul's hopes faded. The humans were exactly what they appeared to be. Weak, divided, and primitive, they fought wars among themselves with crude weapons. Their societies were chaotic and inefficient. They had no unity, no grand purpose, no vision beyond their own small world. The scout commander's report was typical. The species shows standard Delta characteristics. Recommendation: immediate annexation. Population suitable for labor and resource extraction. No significant military threat detected. Zekthul read through the detailed analysis. Human weapons could not penetrate Cathara bioarmor. Human ships were slower than even the oldest Cathara designs. Human governments were so fractured that they could not organize effective resistance even if they wanted to. It would be another simple conquest. Another species added to the great catalog of the Cathara Empire, another world to provide resources for the master race. He composed his report to the Hegemony Council, the ruling body of all Cathara. New delta species discovered at coordinates 7.4.8 on 12.3, primitive but numerous, suitable for standard incorporation protocols. No special measures required. The response came back within cycles. Proceed with annexation. Standard terms apply. Standard terms meant the humans would be given one chance to surrender peacefully. If they refused, the Cathara would demonstrate their power until surrender became inevitable. If they still refused, they would be conquered by force. If they proved too troublesome, they would be reduced to a more manageable population level. It was all very civilized and orderly, in the Cathara way. Zekthul began preparations for the annexation. He would take a small fleet. No need for anything large against such a weak species. A few crystal ships would be more than enough to cow the humans into submission. Perhaps he would not even need to fire a shot. As he worked, he found himself thinking about the nature of perfection. The Cathara had achieved it through millions of years of evolution and genetic engineering. They had made themselves stronger, smarter, and more beautiful than any other species in the galaxy. They had transcended the weaknesses that held other races back. The humans, by contrast, seemed to embody every possible weakness. They were fragile where the Cathara were strong. They were chaotic where the Cathara were ordered. They were primitive where the Cathara were advanced. They were emotional where the Cathara were logical. And yet something in the scout reports nagged at him. There were details that did not quite fit the standard Delta pattern. The humans fought their own wars with surprising intensity. They recovered from disasters with unusual speed. They adapted their technology faster than most species, but these were minor curiosities. Every species had some unique traits. In the end, they all fell before Cathara superiority. Zekthul dismissed his doubts and focused on the task ahead. Soon the humans would learn what countless other species had learned before them. In the galaxy there was only one alpha race. Everything else existed to serve that truth. He did not know that he was about to encounter something that would change everything the Cathara believed about strength, weakness, and the nature of perfection itself. He did not know that these supposedly weak humans would prove to be something entirely new in the galaxy's history. He prepared for just another routine conquest, unaware that he was about to meet the species that would redefine what it meant to be truly dangerous. The crystal ship appeared over New York City on a Tuesday morning, blocking out the sun like a floating mountain. Sarah Chen was drinking coffee in her laboratory at Columbia University when every screen in the building started showing the same impossible sight. A ship the size of Manhattan hung in the sky, its crystalline surface throwing rainbows across the city below. Around the world, identical ships appeared over London, Beijing, Moscow, and a dozen other major cities. The message that followed came, in every human language, broadcast simultaneously across all frequencies. Primitive species of the third planet, the voice said, cold and emotionless. You are now subjects of the Cathara hegemony. Surrender your governments and military forces immediately. Compliance will result in favorable classification. Resistance will result in correction. Sarah stared at her computer screen, where translation software was already working to decode the alien message. As a xenobiologist, she had spent her career wondering if humanity was alone in the universe. She had never imagined the answer would come like this. The world's response was chaos. Some governments tried to establish communication, others mobilized their militaries. Most simply panicked. But within hours, something remarkable began to happen. Scientists, engineers, and military leaders started talking to each other across national boundaries like never before. President Martinez was in an emergency session with world leaders when the first landing ships descended. They were smaller versions of the motherships, but still massive by human standards. Each one was the size of a city block and moved without any visible means of propulsion. Colonel Marcus Torres watched the first Cathara emerge from their ships through his binoculars. He had commanded special forces units in 3 different wars, but nothing had prepared him for this sight. The aliens were giants, 12 feet tall and covered in what looked like living crystal armor. They moved with impossible grace, and the air around them seemed to shimmer with heat waves. "Orders, sir?" his lieutenant asked. Torres looked at the small army of human soldiers surrounding Central Park, where the alien ship had landed. There, rifles and rockets looked like toys compared to the towering figures emerging from the crystal ship. But he had his orders. Hold position. Let them make the first move. The Kithara did not make them wait long. The leader, a massive figure whose crystal skin glowed with inner light, raised one hand. Gravity twisted around him like a visible force, and 3 city buses lifted off the ground and crumpled into metal balls. The demonstration lasted exactly 10 seconds. The message was clear. Resistance is futile. But the humans did not surrender. In the hours that followed, strange things began to happen. While diplomats tried to negotiate with the aliens, scientists studied every image and recording they could find. Sarah Chen found herself leading a hastily assembled team of researchers from around the world, all working together through video conferences to understand their new reality. "Look at this," Dr. James Patel said, highlighting a section of video from London. "See how the gravity field distorts light? There's a pattern to it, a frequency." "And here," added Dr. Yuki Tanaka from Tokyo, "the crystal structure of their armor reflects specific wavelengths. It's not random." Sarah felt a familiar excitement building. This was how science worked at its best. Dozens of brilliant minds focused on a single problem, sharing data and insights without regard for politics or nationality. The alien threat had done something that decades of diplomacy had failed to achieve. It had united human researchers in common purpose. Meanwhile, Colonel Torres was learning different lessons. The first skirmish came when Kithara soldiers tried to set up what they called a processing center in Times Square. Torres led a team of volunteers in an attack designed to test alien capabilities. The results were sobering. Human weapons barely scratched Kithara armor. The aliens moved faster than their size suggested they should. Worst of all, they fought with casual efficiency, as if humans were nothing more than annoying insects. But Torres noticed something the aliens seemed to miss. Every Kithara moved in predictable patterns. They fought with overwhelming superiority, but they also fought with arrogance. They did not adapt their tactics to human resistance because they clearly did not consider humans capable of meaningful resistance. After the failed attack, Torres gathered his surviving soldiers. Half his team was dead or wounded, but those who remained had learned valuable lessons. "They're stronger and faster than us," he told them, "but they fight like they've never faced real opposition. They expect us to break and run. When we don't, they don't know how to adjust." Warcast Zekthul reviewed the first day's reports with growing confusion. The humans had not surrendered as expected. Instead, they seemed to be studying Kithara forces with intense interest. Their attacks were suicidal and ineffective, but they kept coming. More disturbing, each attack showed slight improvements over the last. This was not standard Delta behavior. Delta species typically surrendered after the first demonstration of Kithara power. Some Beta species fought back for a few days or weeks before accepting their fate, but the humans showed no signs of accepting anything. "Perhaps they do not understand the situation," his lieutenant suggested. "Impossible. The translation protocols are perfect. They understand our words. Then perhaps they are too primitive to recognize superior force when they see it." Zekthul considered this. It was possible. Some very primitive species fought until they were nearly extinct because they could not grasp the concept of surrender. But the humans did not seem that primitive. Their technology was crude but functional. Their communications were sophisticated. Their social structures were complex. No, something else was happening here. The humans understood their situation perfectly. They simply chose to fight anyway. Over the following weeks, the pattern continued. Human forces launched attack after attack against Kithara positions. Each attack failed, but each one lasted slightly longer than the last. Human weapons remained ineffective, but humans began using them in new ways. Human tactics remained primitive, but humans kept trying new approaches. Most unsettling of all, human casualties seemed to strengthen rather than weaken their resolve. On Gamma worlds, heavy casualties usually led to surrender within days. On Delta worlds, it happened within hours. But human losses in the millions only seemed to make the survivors more determined. Sarah Chen's research team made their first breakthrough on day 18. Working with captured fragments of Kythera technology, they discovered that the alien armor relied on harmonic resonance to maintain its strength, disrupt the frequency, and the supposedly invulnerable material became brittle. "It's like breaking glass with a high note," Sarah explained to the Emergency Science Council. "We just need to find the right frequency." Colonel Torres received the first prototype sonic weapons on day 23. They were crude devices, barely more than focused sound generators mounted on rifle frames. But when his team tested them against a captured piece of Kythera armor, the crystal shattered like ice. The first successful human counterattack came on day 25. Torres led a strike team equipped with the new sonic weapons against a Kythera patrol in downtown Los Angeles. For the first time since the invasion began, human soldiers killed Kythera warriors. Zekthul read the report 3 times before he believed it. Humans had destroyed an entire patrol unit, not through luck or accident, but through adapted weapons and improved tactics. In less than a month, the supposedly primitive species had gone from helpless victims to actual threats. He sent an urgent message to the Hegemony Council: request immediate reinforcements. The Delta classification may be in error. These humans display unusual adaptive capabilities. The response was swift and dismissive. Impossible. Maintain current operations. Do not request additional resources for a Delta species. Zekthul stared at the message for a long time. In 10,000 years of expansion, the Kythera had never encountered a species that improved this quickly under pressure. Every other race either surrendered or was crushed. These humans seemed to be doing something entirely different. They were learning. 6 months after first contact, everything had changed. Sarah Chen no longer worked in her comfortable laboratory at Columbia University. Instead, she lived in an underground bunker system beneath the Rocky Mountains, part of the largest scientific collaboration in human history. Researchers from every nation worked together in shifts that never stopped, fueled by coffee, determination, and the knowledge that humanity's survival depended on their success. The breakthrough that changed everything came when her team captured an intact Kythera weapon. It was a gravity manipulator, a device that could crush tanks or lift buildings into the air. To the Kythera, it was routine technology. To humanity, it was a window into physics they had barely begun to understand. "The energy matrix is biological," Dr. Patel explained during the morning briefing. "It's not a machine in any sense we understand. It's more like an organ that responds to the user's neural patterns." Sarah studied the readings on her screen. "But that means, yes, we can't just copy their technology. We have to understand how their minds work." This realization led to a new type of research. Human scientists began studying captured Kythera bodies with the same intensity they once applied to their technology. What they found challenged every assumption about alien biology. The Kythera were not naturally occurring beings. They had been engineered, rebuilt from some original species over millions of years. Their crystal bodies were living computers, their minds were network processors, and their entire biology was designed for one purpose: perfect efficiency and conquest. But perfection, as humans discovered, was also a weakness. Colonel Torres received the intelligence reports while planning the liberation of Chicago. The Kythera had turned the city into a processing center, where captured humans were sorted for various uses. The crystalline overlords worked with mechanical precision, following protocols that had succeeded for 10,000 years. "They can't improvise," Torres told his strike team leaders. "Every Kythera follows the same tactical patterns. They're predictable because they're programmed to be perfect." The assault on Chicago was humanity's first major victory. Using sonic weapons that shattered Kythera armor and tactics that exploited their inflexibility, human forces retook the city in 72 hours. More importantly, they captured dozens of Kythera alive, along with intact examples of their most advanced technology. The psychological impact was enormous. For months, humans had lived with the knowledge that aliens could kill them at will. Now they had proof that the aliens could be killed in return. But the real victory was happening in laboratories around the world. Dr. Yuki Tanaka made the discovery that would change the course of the war. Working with tissue samples from captured Kythera, She found something that should have been impossible. Their supposedly perfect biology had flaws. Their crystalline structure makes them incredibly strong, she explained to the Global Research Council, but it also makes them vulnerable to specific resonance frequencies. Not just their armor, their entire bodies operate on harmonic principles. Sarah Chen saw the implications immediately. If we can map those frequencies, we can build weapons that don't just break their armor. We can build weapons that shut down their biology entirely. The first biodisruption weapons were crude and short-ranged, but they worked. Cathara warriors who had seemed invincible began falling to handheld devices that looked like modified cell phones. The psychological effect on both sides was dramatic. Warcast Zekthal watched his forces retreat from what humans called the Battle of the Mississippi. For the first time in Cathara history, his warriors were running from an enemy they had initially dismissed as harmless. The reports from his field commanders made grim reading. The humans adapt faster than any species we have encountered, his lieutenant reported. Each engagement shows new weapons, new tactics, new approaches. They do not repeat failed strategies. Zekthal had been filing increasingly urgent reports with the Hegemony Council for months. Each time the response was the same. Maintain current operations. Do not request additional resources. Delta species cannot pose significant threats to alpha superiority. But the evidence before his eyes told a different story. The humans were not fighting like a Delta species. They were not even fighting like a Beta species. They fought with a creativity and adaptability that Zekthal had never seen before. They learn from defeat, he said, more to himself than to his lieutenant. Every time we defeat them, they become stronger. This was impossible according to Cathara science. Species became weaker under pressure, not stronger. They broke down, surrendered, or died. They did not evolve in real time to meet new challenges, but that seemed to be exactly what humans were doing. The proof came during the siege of Moscow. Cathara forces had surrounded the city, cutting off all supply lines. By all historical precedent, the human defenders should have surrendered within weeks. Instead, they held out for 3 months while human engineers worked around the clock to develop new defenses. When the siege finally ended, it was not because Moscow fell. It was because human forces launched a coordinated counterattack using weapons that had not existed when the siege began. Gravity shields that deflected Cathara attacks, quantum communicators that allowed instant coordination across the globe, powered armor that let human soldiers match Cathara warriors in direct combat. Sarah Chen stood in the recaptured Red Square, looking at the wreckage of Cathara war machines. In less than a year, humanity had gone from helpless victims to technological equals. The learning curve was so steep it defied every model of technological development she knew. "How are we doing this?" Dr. Patel asked, studying a captured Cathara gravity generator that human engineers had already improved upon. Sarah thought about the question carefully. "Desperation," she said finally. "They've put us in a situation where we have to evolve or die, and humans have always been good at evolution." The Cathara, she realized, had made a fundamental error. They had assumed that their own path to perfection was the only possible path. They had built themselves into living weapons perfectly designed for conquest. But in doing so, they had lost the ability to change. Humans had never lost that ability. If anything, the alien invasion had focused it to a laser point. Every human scientist, engineer, and soldier was working toward the same goal: survival through adaptation. Colonel Torres received his promotion to general during the victory celebration in Moscow. But he was already planning the next phase of the war. The humans had learned to defend themselves. Now it was time to learn how to attack. "They think they know everything about us," he told his staff. "But they're still thinking of us as we were 6 months ago. They don't understand that we're not the same species they invaded." He was right. The Cathara continued to plan their strategies based on outdated intelligence. They expected humans to break under pressure, to fragment into competing groups, to eventually surrender when the cost became too high. Instead, the pressure had forged humanity into something new. National boundaries meant nothing when the entire species was threatened. Religious and political differences were set aside in favor of species survival. Competition between groups was channeled into competing to contribute more to the common defense. Warcast Zekthal filed his final report to the Hegemony Council as human forces approached his command ship. The crystal mountain that had once seemed invincible was now surrounded by human vessels that moved faster and hit harder than anything in the Cathara fleet. "The human classification must be revised," he wrote. "They are not Delta. They are not Beta. They may not even be within our classification system. Recommend immediate negotiation for peaceful withdrawal." The response came back within minutes. "Impossible. No species has ever forced Cathara withdrawal. Maintain current operations. Reinforcements en route." Zekthul looked at the message and then at the battle displays showing human forces closing in from all directions. The Hegemony Council still did not understand what they were facing. They thought this was just another conquest gone slightly wrong. They had no idea that they were watching the birth of something entirely new in the galaxy's history. A species that became more dangerous the harder you tried to kill it. 2 years after first contact, the impossible happened. Humans began winning. The change was so dramatic that even humans themselves could barely believe it. General Torres stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned UES Defiance, watching Cathara crystal ships flee from human forces. The ship around him was a marvel of hybrid technology. Human innovation combined with captured Cathara science to create something neither species could have built alone. Pursuit course laid in. "General," his navigation officer reported. "Negative. Let them run." Torres studied the tactical display. "I want them to report back to their commanders. I want them to spread the word." The word was simple. Humans were no longer prey. The transformation had begun in Sarah Chen's underground laboratories and spread across the globe like wildfire. Human engineers had not just copied Cathara technology, they had improved it. Where the aliens used brute force, humans applied elegance. Where the Cathara relied on overwhelming power, humans used efficiency and innovation. The breakthrough weapon was something humans called a resonance disruptor. It looked like nothing more than a metal rod with crystal attachments, but it could shut down any Cathara device from their weapons to their life support systems. Even better, it could be mass-produced using Earth materials. Dr. Yuki Tanaka watched the factory production lines from the observation deck above the main floor. Thousands of the devices rolled off assembly lines every hour, destined for human forces around the world. 2 years ago, she had been studying alien tissue samples in secret. Now she was watching humanity arm itself with weapons that made Cathara technology obsolete. "Production rate is exceeding projections," her assistant reported. "We're making more than we can distribute." Tanaka smiled grimly. "Then we make more distribution systems. The goal is to arm every human who can hold a weapon." The Cathara had made their next fatal mistake when they brought reinforcements. A massive fleet of crystal ships arrived in Earth's solar system, more firepower than had ever been assembled in one place. The Hegemony Council was finally taking the human threat seriously, but they were still thinking in terms of traditional conquest. They expected to find a broken world ready to surrender. Instead, they found a unified planet that had spent 2 years preparing for exactly this moment. The Battle of Luna was the turning point. Human forces had built a network of hidden bases on the moon, armed with weapons that the Cathara did not know existed. When the alien fleet moved to secure the lunar installations, they walked into the largest ambush in military history. General Torres commanded the operation from his flagship, coordinating attacks from bases that appeared out of nowhere. Human ships that looked like simple cargo vessels suddenly revealed weapon systems that could punch through Cathara shields. Ground installations that had seemed abandoned came alive with firepower that cut through crystal armor like paper. But the real shock came when human ships began outmaneuvering Cathara vessels. The aliens had always been faster and more agile than their enemies. Now they found themselves chasing human fighters that moved like they were dancing, always one step ahead of Cathara targeting systems. "How are they doing this?" Warcast Zekthul demanded as his fleet fell back in disorder. His sensor officer's voice carried disbelief. "They appear to be using gravity manipulation that is more advanced than our own, Warcast." It was true. Human engineers had taken Cathara gravity technology and completely reimagined it. Where the aliens used massive power-hungry systems to achieve crude effects, humans used precision and efficiency to accomplish the same results with devices a fraction of the size. Dr. Patel's team had made the critical discovery 6 months earlier. "They're using their technology like a club," he had explained to the Engineering Council. "Overwhelming force applied without subtlety. But gravity is not a club, it's a scalpel. Human ships began appearing in places they should not be able to reach. Kythera supply lines were cut by forces that seemed to materialize out of empty space. Communication networks went dark as human raiders struck with surgical precision. The Kythera found themselves fighting an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere. Human forces would appear, strike devastating blows, and vanish before reinforcements could arrive. Traditional Kythera tactics, based on overwhelming local superiority, became useless against an enemy that refused to stand and fight on Kythera terms. Sarah Chen was leading the development of the next generation of human weapons when the reports started coming in from across the galaxy. The Kythera Empire was under attack on multiple fronts. Species that had been enslaved for thousands of years were rising in rebellion, armed with human weapons and human tactical advice. "We're not just fighting for Earth anymore," she told the Global Research Council. "We're fighting for every species the Kythera have ever conquered." The liberation campaigns began with the Vorthak, the warrior species that had been defeated 300 years earlier. Human advisors helped them adapt their traditional fighting methods to use resonance disruptors and gravity manipulation. Within weeks, Vorthak rebels had freed their entire star system. The Milani followed, using their natural technological aptitude to improve on human designs. The peaceful species that had surrendered without a fight became the galaxy's most effective weapon manufacturers, producing advanced systems faster than even human factories. One by one, the subject species of the Kythera Empire began breaking free. Each rebellion was supplied with human technology and guided by human strategic thinking. But more importantly, each was inspired by the human example, that even the most overwhelming force could be defeated through adaptation and persistence. The Kythera Hegemony Council finally grasped the scope of the crisis during the emergency session on the capital world. Reports flooded in from across their 40,000 system empire. Rebellions were spreading faster than they could be suppressed. Worse, the rebels were winning. "How is this possible?" the Prime Hegemon demanded. "How can a single Delta species threaten our entire empire?" Warcaster Zekthul had been summoned to provide answers. He stood before the Crystal Council chamber, his report prepared but knowing that the truth would not be welcomed. "The humans are not a Delta species," he said simply. "Our classification system has no category for what they represent." The chamber erupted in crystalline voices of denial and outrage. For 10,000 years, the Kythera had been the apex predators of the galaxy. The idea that a soft, primitive species could challenge that supremacy was literally unthinkable. But the evidence was overwhelming. The Kythera military, which had conquered thousands of species without suffering a single major defeat, was losing on every front. Their technology, which had been supreme for millennia, was being surpassed by innovations that came from nowhere. "What do you recommend?" the Prime Hegemon asked finally. Zekthul's answer was simple and devastating. "Total war. Destroy their homeworld and eliminate the species entirely. It is the only way to prevent the collapse of the Empire." The decision was unanimous. If the humans could not be conquered, they would be exterminated. The Kythera began mobilizing every ship, every weapon, every resource they possessed for a final assault on Earth. They did not realize that this decision would seal their fate. The humans had spent 2 years learning to defend themselves. Now they would learn to attack. And as every other species in the galaxy had discovered, humans learned very, very quickly. General Torres received the intelligence reports about the massive Kythera fleet assembling for the final assault. Instead of fear, he felt something like satisfaction. The aliens were finally committing everything to one decisive battle. "Good," he told his staff. "Now we know where they all are." Sarah Chen was putting the finishing touches on humanity's ultimate weapon when the news arrived. It was not a bomb or a gun, but something far more dangerous, a way to turn Kythera perfection against itself. "Their networked minds are their greatest strength," she explained to the assembled leaders of Earth's defense. "But networks can be hacked, and once we're inside their system..." She did not need to finish the thought. Everyone understood the implications. The final battle was about to begin, but the Kythera had already lost. They just did not know it yet. 5 years after first contact, the Kythera hegemony ceased to exist. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, watching the final Kythera stronghold fall. The massive crystal fortress that had commanded 1,000 star systems for millennia was now a collection of shattered fragments floating in space. Around her, displays showed human fleets across the galaxy completing similar operations. It was over. The end had come faster than anyone expected. The Kythera's final gamble, throwing their entire remaining fleet against Earth in one desperate assault, had backfired spectacularly. Dr. Sarah Chen's network infiltration virus had turned their greatest strength into their ultimate weakness. Status. Report, Vasquez commanded. All Kythera command nodes have been neutralized. Her communications officer reported. Resistance has ceased across all occupied systems. Liberation fleets are moving to secure former slave worlds. Vasquez nodded but felt no triumph. Too many humans had died to reach this moment. Too many species had suffered under Kythera rule. Victory was necessary, but it came at a cost that would never be forgotten. The virus that ended the war had been Sarah Chen's masterpiece. For 3 years she had studied Kythera neural networks, learning how their crystalline minds connected and shared information. What she discovered was that their perfect unity was also a fatal vulnerability. They think as one, she had explained to the War Council, but that means if we can control one, we can control all. The network virus spread through Kythera command systems like wildfire. It did not destroy their technology or harm their biology. Instead, it did something far more devastating. It gave them human emotions. For the first time in their 10,000-year history, Kythera warriors experienced doubt, fear, and despair. Their perfect unity shattered as individuals began questioning orders, avoiding combat, and in some cases simply shutting down entirely. An empire built on absolute certainty collapsed when its rulers suddenly understood uncertainty. General Torres had watched the final battle from Earth's command center. The massive Kythera fleet that arrived to destroy humanity was the largest military force ever assembled. Crystal ships stretched from Earth to Mars, weapons capable of cracking planets charged and ready. But the attack never came. As the virus spread through their networks, Kythera commanders began experiencing human memories pulled from captured neural patterns. They felt fear for the first time. They understood loss. They comprehended mortality. Their surrendering, his tactical officer had reported in disbelief. The entire fleet is powering down weapons and requesting terms. Torres had spent 5 years fighting an enemy that seemed invincible. Now that enemy was asking for mercy, driven to surrender by the very emotions they had tried to eliminate from their perfect society. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Human liberation fleets, aided by former Kythera slaves, swept across the galaxy. Species that had been conquered thousands of years ago found themselves free for the first time in their recorded history. The 40,000 system empire that had seemed eternal crumbled in a matter of months. But humanity's approach to victory surprised everyone, including themselves. Dr. Yuki Tanaka was part of the first diplomatic mission to contact liberated species. She expected to find worlds devastated by millennia of oppression. Instead, she found something else. A galaxy full of species that had forgotten how to be free. They don't know what to do, she reported back to Earth. Some of them are asking us to be their new rulers. This was the challenge no one had anticipated. It was one thing to defeat the Kythera. It was another thing entirely to help rebuild a galaxy that had known only tyranny for 10,000 years. President Martinez addressed the United Earth Assembly with a proposal that would define humanity's role in the galaxy. We did not fight to become the new Kythera. We fought to ensure that no species would ever again face what we faced. Our duty now is not to rule, but to teach. The decision to refuse galactic dominion was controversial. Some humans argued that they had earned the right to rule through victory. Others pointed out that many species needed guidance and protection. But the majority agreed with Martinez. Becoming galactic conquerors would make humanity no better than the enemies they had defeated. Instead, humanity chose a different path. The Galactic Liberation Council was established on the former Kythera capital world. With representatives from every freed species, humans provided technology, strategic advice, and protection. But each species was free to choose its own government and destiny. The only universal law was that conquest and slavery were forever banned. Sarah Chen found herself appointed as the Council's first Director of Technological Development. Her job was to ensure that every species had access to the tools they needed to defend themselves and prosper. It was a massive undertaking. but one that excited her more than any research project she had ever attempted. "We're not just rebuilding the galaxy," she told her staff during their first planning session. "We're reimagining what galactic civilization can be." The Kythera survivors were perhaps the greatest challenge. The virus had not killed them, but it had fundamentally changed them. No longer the perfect, emotionless conquerors they had been, they were struggling to understand their new reality. Admiral Vasquez found herself assigned to work with former warcast Zek Thul, who had become an unexpected ally in the final days of the war. The massive crystalline being was a shadow of his former self, haunted by memories of the atrocities he had committed and the emotions he now felt. "My people do not know how to live with regret," he told her during one of their meetings. "We designed ourselves to feel no guilt, no remorse, no shame. Now we feel all of these things, and we do not know how to bear them." Vasquez had little sympathy for the former conquerors, but she recognized that helping them adapt was necessary for galactic stability. "Then you'll learn," she said simply. "The same way every other species learns to live with difficult emotions, one day at a time." The transformation of the galaxy took decades, but the foundations were laid in those first crucial years after the war. Trade networks were established between former slave worlds. Cultural exchange programs helped isolated species reconnect with the larger galactic community. Most importantly, a new generation grew up that had never known Kythera rule. 20 years after the liberation, Dr. Tanaka stood in the observation deck of a space station orbiting the former Kythera capital. Below her, the crystal cities that had once housed the galaxy's oppressors were now home to refugees and immigrants from 100 different worlds. The rigid perfection of Kythera architecture had been softened by the chaotic creativity of a dozen species working together. "It's beautiful," her assistant observed. Tanaka nodded. It was not the cold perfection the Kythera had achieved, but something better, a living, growing, changing civilization that embraced diversity rather than eliminating it. She thought about the inscription that had been placed in the memorial chamber of the old Kythera Council Hall. It was taken from Warcast Zek Thul's final report to his masters, discovered in the ruins of their military archives. "We thought we were Alpha. We were wrong. They are not bound by our classifications, our understanding, or our limitations. They are something new, something that makes even Alpha obsolete. If any civilization survives to read this, do not fight the humans. Do not attempt to conquer them. They will learn from every defeat until defeating them becomes impossible. They are not the apex predator because they are the strongest or the fastest or the smartest. They are the apex predator because they never stop evolving." But the memorial's final inscription was humanity's own addition, crafted by the survivors of Earth's darkest hour. The true measure of an apex species is not how effectively it can dominate others, but how completely it can lift others up. Strength without compassion is tyranny. Intelligence without wisdom is destruction. The galaxy belongs not to the strongest, but to those who make everyone else stronger. Elena Vasquez visited the memorial on the anniversary of the liberation every year. As she aged and her hair turned gray, she watched new species join the Galactic Council, each one adding their own perspectives and capabilities to the growing civilization. Humanity had indeed become the galaxy's apex species, but not in the way the Kythera had been. They were apex because they helped others reach their own potential. They were dominant because they refused to dominate. They were the new Alpha because they had proven that true strength came not from perfection, but from the endless capacity to grow, change, and become better. The age of the Kythera was over. The age of cooperation had begun, and at its heart were the small soft creatures who had once been dismissed as weak and primitive, but who had proven that the greatest power in the universe was not the ability to destroy, but the ability to create something better. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly as humanity intended.